so they can know, can you repeat your name and your address growing up?
Sure. My name is Joel Platt, Joel, Joel, and I grew up in Morton Grove. I lived at 7937 Arcadia Street, which is right near, close to Washington Street in Debster.
What schools did you attend with Hillary?
Maine East for 3 years.
And what is your earliest memory of Hillary?
Well, Hillary and I knew each other from student council. So probably I met her, I would guess, when I was a sophomore.
Could you tell us a little bit about maybe the first encounter you had with Hillary in student council?
Well, you know, there were a fairly large number of kids in student council, and I remember Hillary as being especially friendly, and also she was extremely smart. And she didn't talk a lot, and some people in student council, you know, like to talk very, very much. They like to hear themselves talk. But she wasn't like that. She was quiet. Back then, you know, we had, our political affiliations were different. You probably know Hillary grew up as a Republican. And back then, generally, our political affiliations were the same as our parents, because at that time, we identified ourselves pretty much with our parents. And it wasn't until college, and maybe even after college, that people started changing their political views. So she identified herself as a Republican, and I was a Democrat. And I remember there was a debate at school where I think it was Goldwater versus Johnson, and Hillary represented Goldwater, and a friend of mine represented Lyndon Johnson. And so, but also back then, your political feelings weren't extremely strong. In other words, you just because somebody was Republican didn't mean you disliked them. Today, I think people feel more strongly about politics. But I just remember her as a, you know, very friendly and cheerful person.
Did you work on projects with her in student council?
You know, I don't remember any specific projects. You're asking me to remember a long time ago. I think we might have worked on like the homecoming float. I kind of remember that, but there were a whole bunch of kids working on that. And maybe some class parties, things like that.
Okay, so you told us how a little bit what she was like. Can you like compare her to others back then and like about her appearance? What made her like stand out?
Well, let's see. I think Hillary was she was on student council, but she was also a class officer, and she was. If you look in the yearbook, which I showed you, we can look through it later. You'll see that she's on quite a few pages, and more than most people, because she was involved in lots of different activities. And she also, I don't think I shared any classes with her, but other people who shared classes with her would comment on, you know, she's very, very smart.
Did you ever go to her house and meet her family? Were you ever involved in that kind
No,
of stuff?
and I didn't go out with her.
So, you just knew her in high school only?
I just knew her in high school, right?
Okay, so what classes did you guys take together?
We didn't have class together.
Okay.
Did you socialize with her?
We went to parties, yeah, not together as a couple, but we went to the same parties together, yes.
What were those parties like?
Well, they were pretty tame, no drinking. They, basically, we would have a record player, and there would be music, and people would be dancing, and frequently the parties were in somebody's backyard. 'Cause houses weren't real big. Her house wasn't real big. My house was, fairly good size, but not huge. And so when we had a party at my house, it was, if we could do it in good weather, we would usually have it outside. But usually it was a lot of dancing, because that was what people did back then. Rock and roll was just starting out, and people really liked to dance.
Earlier, one of the other gentlemen told us that she often went to sock hops. Do you have any memories
Oh,
of
yeah,
those?
yeah, I do, actually. That's right. Yeah, we had dances at the high school. And yep, we would frequently, the whole group, and you mentioned before other people who had been interviewed, all those people were active in high school. And they would go to the parties, and we'd go to the sock hops together, or other dances at the school. And everything, was just basically people. I would say when we were freshmen, the guys were on one side, the girls were on the other. But then, as time went on, sophomore year, junior year, people paired up, and they had girlfriends and boyfriends, and intermingled a lot more, and it was more fun then.
Was she a good dancer?
I don't remember. I can't comment.
Did she ever date any of your friends in school, or did you ever hear about her relationship status? Was that something that you guys talked about?
Well, she dated one guy I knew, nice guy, Jim Van Scoik, but I don't think it was anything real serious. I think they just went out a couple of times.
Do you remember any stories about Hillary interacting with any teachers or any faculty at any of the schools?
No, I think the only one I remember is with Mr. Carlson, the history teacher.
Do you remember what any teacher said about her?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember what any teacher said about her?
No, not specifically, no. You got to remember, Hillary, and this is really important to remember, she was just one of the kids. She was smarter than a lot of kids. She wasn't the smartest in the school. I mean, we had a couple of other students were straight A students, she was active in certain activities, but she wasn't very outspoken, so she didn't really stand out. I think she ran, it's just, my memory is a little fuzzy on this, but I thought she had run for secretary of the student council at Maine South, and I can't remember if she won or not. So the way that she stood out is she would run for different positions, and like I said, I think for the class, not the student council, but for class, I think she ran for class secretary, and she won that position. So you would see her campaigning, believe it or not. But the way we would campaign back then was basically we'd just walk around the school or the cafeteria and say, "I'm running for this office. Will you vote for me?" That's basically it.
Did you know about her involvement as a Goldwater girl?
Yes.
Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, just that she represented Goldwater in the mock debate that we had at school, and but I don't think she was very. I don't know. You'd have to ask Hillary actually. I don't know how active she was actually campaigning for Goldwater.
Okay.
And actually, Goldwater, was a somewhat conservative Republican, but he wasn't radically conservative. And Johnson, some people would say Johnson was pretty liberal. He had a lot of, big ideas. Some of them actually took effect. But it wasn't like you see in the current campaign when you've got somebody like Bernie Sanders, who's very, very, very liberal, and somebody like Ted Cruz, who's very, very conservative. They were more closer to the middle.
So what was it like after the class split? How was it like staying in touch with each other?
Oh.
Was that hard or?
It's a good question. Very interesting question. We actually have a combined reunion every year. And we actually, after the split, people socialized just like they did before. We'd have parties, we'd invite our friends from South, they'd invite their friends from East. There was no difference at all. The only difference was graduation. You didn't attend the same graduation. And you might not have attended the same parties at school, but by then, when you're a senior, you don't really attend that many parties at school. Your parties are at somebody's house. And there was absolutely no difference. In fact, I would say that most of my friends from high school are from Maine South.
Do you remember what it was like? Like, how did they tell you that, like, we're building a new high school, we're gonna split your class? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was not very pleasant. It really wasn't, because you develop these friendships, and there was a lot of apprehension, and especially for the people who were going to Maine South, because they didn't know what it was going to be like. Maine South at that time was a very modern school, and Maine East was a very traditional school. And I think there was probably some more nervousness on the part of people who were going to South. But a lot of them kind of liked it because they lived in South Park Ridge and it was close. Maine East is on, very, very far. For the kids who were, I can't remember what the dividing line was at Oakton. Did anybody know what the dividing line between South and East is? I don't know. But anyway,
I know there's like a gray area, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
there are people who live like right next to Maine East that go to Maine South.
are there really?
Yeah, I live like 2 blocks away, and I had the choice to go to East.
Oh, you
or
had the
South.
choice, okay, right. But I'm not sure they gave people the choice back then, I just don't remember. But for, geographically, it was, for some, it was good, because they would save time getting to school. But it didn't have much of an effect. I mean, everybody, I think, was, we were concerned about it, but in the bottom line, it didn't have much of an effect, because the friendships continued.
So did she ever tell you about like the time that she went down to Chicago to check on voter fraud? Did that ever?
Check on,
Voter fraud?
no,
after the-
I don't
No?
remember that.
Okay. And then, so were you involved then with the Park Ridge Methodist Church?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Did she ever tell you anything about how, like, do you remember that being a big part of influencing her in high school, or?
No, it was more afterwards that I would.
When you became
if
aware of it.
If I met with her, or we were a group of people, and she might talk about that a little bit, but no, not during high school.
Okay.
Do you remember the debate she had when she had to take the Democratic side and the other girl?
No, she took the Republican side.
Republican.
Yeah. Do I remember it? I mean, I remember it fuzzily. Just that my oldest friend, who I've known since I was 7, took the Democratic side, and so I do remember that debate.
Who is that person?
Howard Primer. He doesn't live around here. Lives in North Carolina.
And what class was that in? Do you have any idea?
Well, it would have been 64, wasn't it?
Oh, I'm sorry, like, was it a history class, or was it?
Oh, I don't remember. It was probably part of the history, but I could talk to Howard.
Okay.
He might have some memory of it.
So what has it been for you, like, watching someone who, like, kind of came from the same place you did, watching her run for president? Did you ever, when you were in high school, did you ever think that this would happen, or?
No.
No?
No, you don't really think. I mean, I grew up across the street from Harrison Ford. He lived in in Morton Grove for up until, I think, he was a freshman or sophomore. And I think then he moved to Park Ridge. So, I mean, did I ever think it was Harry Ford? Did I ever think Harry Ford was going to be a movie star? No. So I don't think any of us thought, will this person be famous or is particularly influential someday? I think when she married Bill Clinton, they would come to reunions. Now, you wouldn't think that the governor would come to a high school reunion. I mean, he's got better things to do. But they did. They came. And so then you would start thinking, gee, she's, what's her future? Her future is different than the rest of us. Nobody else was a elected politician or married to an elected politician, as far as I know. And so, then I think I can't remember, that was a few years after she graduated from law school. So it had been the mid-70s, I think. And so then you start thinking in terms of, well, this person has, his career is going to be different than a lot of people. But then you would think that about some other people too. I mean, people who were doctors, for example, or somebody who got their PhD in physics. I mean, there were some very smart people in our class, and very motivated, and they went to school all over the country, and some of them became extremely successful. I mean, I would say, and I don't know if anybody's actually done a study, but I would say percentage-wise, that there were a lot of successful people in our class.
Do you have a fondest memory of Hillary? Like anything that sticks out when people talk about her and you go back to that moment or anything like that?
Not a particular memory, just sort of an overall impression. I mean, I tell you, whenever we saw each other, she moved away. She went to Wellesley, and then she went to Yale, and then Arkansas. Well, God, I never was in Arkansas until years later. So the overall impression I had of her, was from high school, and then I would see her at reunions, but those were every 4 years. I see her a lot more now than I did back then. So just the impression I had, every time I saw her at a reunion, just the same. I mean, it's like 4 years hadn't passed. And she was just as friendly and relaxed as before. So that was the general impression I had of her. Very friendly, outgoing, nice person. And it's hard for me and some of our other classmates to understand some of the public, what we would call misperceptions of her, as not being a very down-to-earth person. She really is. I mean, in the public life, I think everybody has to put up some sort of a wall or have a certain appearance. But when she gets together with friends, all those walls come down.
Do you remember the reunion she held at the White House?
Oh yeah, sure. I actually helped organize that. Let me think about this. So originally, the plan was to have the reunion at the White House. And now there is there's a reunion committee, and basically the same people every 4 years organize the reunion. And sometimes I would help work on the reunion organization a little bit. So this particular case, they wanted to have it at the White House. And so you don't just call Hillary up and say, can we do this? So I think Betsy contacted somebody at the White House and started talking about it. And then the question came up, how many people? And they were thinking of having it on the lawn where they have the Easter egg hunt, which is big. But they would have to put up tents and platforms, and I think they sent out some letters to classmates and just trying to get an idea of how many people were thinking of coming. And as soon as you mentioned that the reunion was going to be in Washington, a lot more people wanted to come than normal. So there were a lot of people planning to come. I'm pretty sure like 800 people came to that reunion. And so they said, we just can't do it on the White House lawn. So we found a facility just like 2 blocks from the White House called the Carnegie Auditorium, I think. And it's a huge building, but big open building, and just a flat floor, no seats or anything. And it was plenty big enough for 800 people, and so they decided to have that there. So I do have a story about that. It was interesting. So we go to the reunion, and it's at the Carnegie Auditorium, and Hillary and Bill are there, and they're just mingling with all people. And now you got to remember, President Clinton knew a few classmates, and so he would, there were certain people who we recognized, and he would be talking with them. But he's the kind of guy who, he just likes to go around the room and meet as many people who want to meet him. And so he did that. And it was a fairly informal type of party. There was a buffet for food, and there were some tables set up, but nobody, people just sat wherever they wanted. And then there was a dance floor and a band. And so around about 10 o'clock, Hillary, and I'm standing around with a group of people, and Hillary and the president are there, and Hillary says, "Yeah, I'm really, really tired. I just need to go get some rest." And he says, "I'm going to stay." Now, this is not his high school class. And he stayed for another hour talking to people just because that's what he likes to do. So it was very interesting. And then the next day, everybody at the reunion was invited to a tour of the White House. And so we had basically, now it was 800 people, so they had to sort of take us in groups. But it was a great experience. So that was very interesting. And I think it also tells you a lot about the person that she married. This guy, he's just a regular person. He just likes being with people, and it was a nice experience.
How many years is it till the next reunion?
How many years till the next reunion?
Yeah.
We just had it last September, so 4 more years. Yeah. She didn't come to that reunion.
Oh.
No, but she was already out campaigning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you been involved with this campaign with her at all, or?
Yeah. Actually, I got involved during President Clinton's first campaign, so I helped out on that a little bit, and then his second campaign. And I was lucky, my wife and I were lucky enough, we were invited down to Arkansas for election night. It was, really exciting. Nobody knew who was going to win that election.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got to see them after the results were announced, and I think that was the first time that we were ever in Little Rock. And then I'm trying to think what happened after that. Then actually she invited me to visit her at the White House, And I was there on a business trip, so I made arrangements to stop by. We just had a cup of coffee. And then at the next, I think I worked on the next presidential election, and then I worked on her, a little bit on her Senate campaign, but, you know, since it was New York and we were here, I think I went to one event for that. And then I worked on her presidential campaign a lot, her first one. And what I did was I worked in Illinois, and then I went around the country to a few states, and I did what they call surrogate speaking. It's just when somebody speaks who knows the candidate and can, you know, the candidate can't be there, and it's usually to small groups. I would go to like a union hall or a nursing home or a party at somebody's house, and show them pictures and just answer questions about her. And then on the most recent campaign, I've been working a little bit, went out to Iowa for the caucus, and then just came back from Milwaukee, or not Milwaukee, Racine, up in Wisconsin. I did some canvassing up there. Didn't have a whole lot of luck in Wisconsin. So I'll probably do some other, you know, occasionally some surrogate speaking for this campaign.
Are you a part of a group called Friends for Hillary?
I guess so. I mean, I'm working on the campaign, so I think, yeah, I think I am an honorary member. Any other questions?
Yeah, on the, when they had, well, I'm not sure if you were aware, because you were at, they had a convention, I think it was at South though, where they had the student elections. They changed how it was, and Hillary proposed a new way to the new principle. Mara, I'm saying this, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't,
No, if it was at South, I probably wasn't involved in that.
So they had where, instead of having, she actually had at South, each homeroom be a state, and they actually had a mini convention. It's like to do the election.
That's interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But speaking back on student council, like what did you guys seem to spend most of your time on during student council?
You know, it was pretty passive. I was actually president of student council here, my senior year. Student council tried to come up with ideas that would, you know, somehow benefit the students, but there wasn't, as students, you didn't have a lot of power. Everything had to be run by the administration. It's probably the same now. So I think student council was empowered with organizing some activities. I'm not sure if they organized the homecoming party or the parade. I think that was one of their things. And then one idea I think that we'd come up with when I was president was, back then, vending machines weren't very common. I think I was at another high school at one time and saw that there was a vending machine, and they had fresh fruit in it. You know, it was a refrigerated vending machine. So I thought, well, that would be a good idea. And so what we did is we proposed what we call the fruit machine for Maine East. And the administration approved it, and so we had, you know, something that was healthy, that kids could get a snack between classes. But other than parties and events, student council didn't get into any areas that were controversial. None that I can remember. Nothing at that time. You know, the opposition to the Vietnam War was just starting. I remember very clearly, there was no discussion of that, because the first discussions I had about that was when I was at college. And that was probably even maybe a year or two when I was into college, to get into those kinds of things. And then back in let's see, we graduated in 65, so probably 67, 68, then the anti-war movement was getting going more. And I have a feeling, I don't know for sure, but the high school students probably might have been getting more interested in that at that time. So I would say, again, somewhat passive.
Did you guys ever try to stop the separation of the senior class? Like, did any students come together and try to get administration to just have everyone like graduate at the same school?
No.
No.
No. I mean, there probably were some people who thought about it, but back then, students, I don't think would have been that aggressive. And now I think students feel more empowered, and not that they necessarily get their way, but they're more likely to speak out.
Joel, talk a little bit, yeah, if you can elaborate on that, like, what was it, if you could put yourself back then, that's quite a long time ago, as a student, like, in today's world, how different it is, what would, what would today's teenagers not, like, really realize what it was like back then? Just growing up, your worldview, the way your outlook, just how you dealt with, just how it was different.
Well, I think one difference was when I went to this high school and Hillary went to South, the classes were extremely homogeneous. I mean, very, very few blacks, very few Asians, very few Hispanics, a few, but not many. So the experience with other cultures was minimal. I think if students back then were focused on that, they might have proposed something like intercultural exchanges. Some field trips to other areas of the city that were different, and to get some exposure to other cultures, because it wasn't until college that a lot of us got exposures to other cultures, and even for some, maybe even after college. So I think there was a real difference. And now Maine East is very multicultural. And even in Maine South, maybe a little less so, but still not quite so much. So I think that's something that that students should encourage. I mean, you can tell Hillary is very conscious of that kind of thing. She tries to be very inclusive. And you can see it in her staff, and you can see it in just her politics. She's changed from where she was back in the 60s.
Do you remember any, did you ever go to Maine South as soon as it opened? Do you remember any first impressions of the school, when it was opened?
Yeah, I mean, we were invited there, and just that it just seemed to have less character than Maine East. It's the only way I can describe it. I would still say that's true today.
Yes.
Right. And there is something, when John and I walked in, the first thing I commented on was the emblem on the floor. And we would never walk on that emblem. And now there's a sign up, but there was no sign back then. Just people knew not to walk on it. But it's a tradition that's been going on for years.
Anything else, anything else that you think we should know or about growing up back then with her?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Those are good questions.
I'm just curious, like, how does it feel being back? Like, do you see any changes in Maine East, how it looks, or I don't know?
Well,
just-
John asked me when was the last time I was here. It was 20 years ago. And I live fairly close, but I don't have a reason. I think I brought my son here once for a class, and when he was like 13 or 14. But I have not been here in, a lot of years. I mean, so I don't, and we didn't really walk around, so I don't know how, if it's changed much. It doesn't look very different. But I don't remember this room having all this wood. This looks a little bit
Was this
newer,
at one
but-
point the library?
Pardon?
Was this at one point the library?
It-
I think so, I heard.
It might have been, but when I was going to school, the library was in a different part of the school, I know that. But it is nice to be back here, and I should probably come more often.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.